Before we begin, I would also like to add a trigger warning for anyone who is sensitive to certain topics. Please take care when you're watching this video. Pause it, take a breath if you need to, or we will add timestamps so that you can skip around and skip over the parts that you may not be comfortable hearing or watching.
The mental and physical and the psychological really escalated. We could barely sleep because we needed to be praying, and we had to repent all the time and try and cleanse ourselves, and started restricting what we could eat. You know, we were getting up at, like I said, about 2 a.m. and we weren't allowed to eat breakfast until 12. And so I started to really lose a lot of weight. Like I was pretty emaciated at the point that I came out. I think my BMI was 15. Like it was bad. And the doctor had told me my heart was going to stop if I didn't get help. And I spent about 3 weeks in hospital. And I was still incredibly brainwashed at that point. And I remember thinking, like, if I can just go to hospital, get fed, top myself up for a few weeks, you know, and then come back, I'd fully kind of come around to the idea and made the decision for myself, because I believed so deeply that I cannot leave this. I'm just terrified to. I'll probably die when I get back, but it might help me to keep going for a little bit longer.
Hey, my name is Shelise and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness into your individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you want to see our faces, go to my YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness. You can like and subscribe, join in on the conversation. It means a lot that you would be willing to support all of our guests who are coming on, being vulnerable enough to tell their stories. So today's guest, one of you actually connected me through Instagram. Thank you so much. I appreciate you directing me to her TikTok, where she is talking about her experience leaving the cult JMS. And we're going to get all into this cult, which, by the way, this is a huge trigger warning for this episode. Please take care. We will talk a lot about SA and other, and it's just going to be a really heavy one. So take your time listening through it. Pause if you need to. Come back. Don't come back. Just do what's best for you. So before I get into more of her story, let me bring her on. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I really, really appreciate you being willing to come on and tell your story, because I know that in the past you had some difficulties when you first started speaking out, and this is a very dangerous cult, and you told me that they are making threats against you, and so I know that this is a really scary situation, so I just commend you for being willing to come on and tell your story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, they have in the past. I took quite a long break from speaking out. My last documentary that I did was on national television here in Australia, and after that I received from the cult a lot of threats. They threatened to sue me for defamation. I moved states, and they stalked me and continued the threats. So it was quite a scary time, especially when I was trying to heal myself. So I did stop publicly speaking out for a significant period of time. But now that we have all this traction, now that Jung, the leader, is again on trial, is being charged with multiple counts of and we are hoping that he will end up in jail for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
It's really important, I feel, that we do start speaking out again. And I know that, the more voices we have, the more power we have, and the more safety we have in numbers too. So, I'm just grateful I have the opportunity to speak out again.
Yeah, and you were also a part of The Cult Next Door. Is that the documentary you were just speaking of, or was that a more recent one?
No, so the one that I was speaking of was one I did back in 2014. And that was the last time I'd spoken out publicly until this documentary, which is called The Cult Next Door.
Okay.
And this we did just this year. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a hard watch. And I'll put the link below in the description so anyone who wants to watch it can, just to get a little bit more context on this cult. I mean, we're going to go deep into it, but wow, it's really difficult. And if you want an even harder watch, you can watch In the Name of God on Netflix. The first 3 episodes are about JMS and his followers and all of the horrible, gruesome things that this guy did. This man is atrocious and disgusting, and these are all my opinions, but I think everyone would agree that what he is doing is absolutely awful. And just to give you an idea, and I also of course want to get your opinion as well, Liz, but he's claiming to be the Messiah, the Jesus returned. He claims that he figured out the math. He was born on the day that Jesus was supposed to come back, 1945, I believe it was.
Yep.
And he's claiming, oh geez, it's so hard to even say. He lures these women and grooms these women to become his brides and eventually ends up them and says it's all in the name of God and you're being shown love by the Lord, and it's just truly repulsive and disgusting, and all of these women feel deeply, deeply violated. And when I say multiple women, he literally told one of his followers, and you can maybe give me more of the context or the details on this if you know more, Liz, but he was telling them that his goal was to 10,000 women, and he's close to that goal, estimated by the numbers of the women who are speaking out.
Yes. And we know that the numbers of the women who are speaking out just scratch the surface. Like, for every woman speaking out, how many thousands have stayed silent out of fear and shame? So, you know, it's hard to estimate just how much damage he's done in that regard. But I would say it is in the thousands, if not, you know, up to that 10,000 mark.
Wow. And it's just so disgusting that even while he was on the run because of his crimes, he's going to multiple countries, and the reports of him raping 100 women in Taiwan while he was there, and then in Hong Kong, and he just goes all over the place while he's on the run for his crimes and continues to commit crimes. Yeah. And he just has no sense of accountability or that he's doing anything wrong. Maybe he gets a sick pleasure from it. It seems like that's the case. I just can't even put myself into the psychology of this man. It's truly disgusting, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to use that word like a bajillion times, but I can't even think of another word. Abhorrent. Vile, yes.
Yeah. Evil.
Really? Honestly, I think I wrote you a message and after I watched the Netflix documentary, and I was like, if I believed in Satan, I would say he's Satan himself. Yes, Satan incarnate. It's the level of and the terror and the way that he goes about committing these crimes is so awful that I just can't even wrap my brain around it. It really takes a toll. And again, that's why I said, guys, if you're watching, just take care of yourself here, because we're going to be going into some heavy, heavy stuff. So if you would, Liz, could you just give everyone a little bit of an overview of his religion and why people may be enticed to join it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jung Myung Seok, like we said, he was born in 1945, and in his 30s he moved to Seoul. He grew up in rural South Korea, moved to Seoul in his 30s, I believe, and he actually joined the Unification Church, otherwise known as the Moonies, and that is another cult based in South Korea that also sort of masquerades as Christian or uses that label, but they are anything but Christian. And this cult is huge. It's also worldwide, and he was a member of that back in the 1970s, and he started to kind of get his own ideas about who he was, and sort of believe that the teachings of the Unification Church weren't quite right, centered around the fact that actually he was the Messiah, not the leader of the Unification Church. And somehow he managed to create this break-off group which believed that he was the Messiah, essentially, that he called the Christian Gospel Mission. And this was around the 1990s, I believe. And they developed a set of 30 lessons based on the Bible. And these 30 lessons very closely resemble the ones taught by the Unification Church, which essentially are just a series of lessons that are designed to brainwash people into believing a particular ideology. And it uses verses from the Bible, and it bases their argument for him being the Messiah on a numerological interpretation of verses taken from the book of Daniel, which contains a lot of prophecies. And these numerological interpretations identify Jung Myung Seok as the second coming of the Messiah.
Yeah.
So we've got the Old Testament, we've got the New Testament, and then according to JMS, we have the Complete Testament, which is a level up from the New Testament, as the New Testament was a level up from the Old Testament. And they also base their teachings on the idea that Eve's fall was due to intercourse with a fallen angel, Lucifer, we'd assume, and that this fall of Eve, which is an inherently sexist opinion, it's Eve's fault that humanity's fallen and women are fundamentally flawed and sinful. You can be redeemed from Eve's fall by having sex with Jung, which is just, it's vile. And that's not my opinion on their teachings. That's something that the Korean Court of Law has identified. They create front groups that might be, a soccer group or a modeling group or a painting group or whatever it might be. And that's the way they kind of lure their victims in, through pretending to be something completely benign, and then slowly they engage these brainwashing techniques to indoctrinate people into the group.
Yeah.
And that is for the purposes of, him having as many women around him and accessible to him as possible.
Right. And it's seen as an honor. Once you're in the group, it feels like an honor to be chosen to have a one-on-one with him.
Yep.
But you have no idea what's awaiting you once you get behind closed doors.
No one knows. Yeah.
The thing that's really upsetting too, and there's a million things that are upsetting. One of the things that's very upsetting is the fact that they target universities, because they want these young, beautiful women who, want to try something new. I think in your case, you were deep into Christianity and you wanted to explore that a little bit more. Yeah. And it's, here comes the D word again, disgusting. Yeah. It's
disgusting. It's predatory.
He's this old man. He's really old, and he's preying on these young kids, or these new 17, 18, 19, I mean, even younger. The allegations against him, elementary school children. It's just, it's so much.
It's horrible. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say in particular about the church before we get into your story?
No, except for the fact that, yes, they do target universities and malls and that sort of thing, and they target young people. And that is because, that's the demographic that he is after, and at the same time, young people, especially if they're just starting university, they're in a transient phase of life, they might be further away from their family and friends, from their hometown, or they're just kind of in this phase of change and discovering themselves, and they intentionally target that phase because that is when you're more open and suggestible to, making new friends, opening your mind to different beliefs and exploring things, and so they really, really capitalize on that phase of people's life.
Yeah. I mean, enter your story, right? You were 18 when you were first approached by these people. So
that's right.
Can you explain how that happened and how they got your attention?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do go into detail a little bit more on my TikTok, but as an overview, basically what happened was I was approached a couple of times by these strangers in two different malls in the hometown that I grew up in, Canberra. And they both claimed to be studying at university. They were international students studying at university, and they had a survey that they were getting people to fill out that was about Australian culture. And neither of these women were at university, by the way, but that's the line that they used. And they asked me to fill out the survey. There was a question down the bottom that specifically asked, are you religious in any way? If so, what is it? And I answered that I was Christian. I was raised Pentecostal Christian. I mean, that's a whole other thing in itself. But I was raised to talk about my faith and share it. And so I pretty readily wrote, I'm religious. I believe in Jesus. And they saw that question and they said, we have a follow-up survey and it's actually about religion in Australia. That's part of our studies as well. But they asked for my email address for that one. And honestly, for me, that was good because I was hanging out with friends and I kind of just wanted to get on with my day. And so handing them my email address, that seemed like an easy way to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And they sent through the questions, and these were religious sort of focused questions, like what you believe, why you believe it, how you feel about your faith, all that sort of thing. And I sent that back and they really liked my answers, apparently. And it took a while. It took a couple of points of connection for me to actually agree to kind of meet up with them. I think if it had just happened once, I don't think it would have hooked me in, but they hooked me in through basically like a front group that was based on creating some kind of Christian art show in which they had a number of subjects that they were going to paint as, representatives of women in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And the art looked amazing. By the way, there was no art show. This never happened.
Oh, wow.
But that was how they used to that was what they used to hook me in. And then eventually, I started doing Bible studies with them, and that's how they began the 30 lessons with me. And that combined with, all the other tactics you use in a brainwashing environment, which is, information control. They start to weave in behavioral control and thought control and, all those different methods. And eventually I did end up brainwashed.
So I'm really surprised that they just intentionally lied to you. So I guess I'm finding it a little bit different than other people who I've interviewed who they're love bombed into a group. And I mean, let's just take Mormonism, for example, because that's what I know. Yep. They say, we're having a basketball game. We want you to join the team. And then you come and join. And then eventually you kind of get sucked in with the love bombing. But in their case, they literally asked to be a part of an art show that didn't exist. So they are intentionally deceiving you and tricking you to become part of this group.
Yes. And that is a practice that is universal to this group. They will never tell you what they represent up front, because what they represent is something that no one would believe if you just told that on the street. If you Google their name, you're not going to believe that they've lost all credibility immediately, because you'll find out about their leader, how he's in prison or was in prison. You'll find out about what they believe, which is that he's a Messiah. So none of this stuff is stuff they communicated up front. In fact, they communicated all that stuff to me. I mean, I didn't find out about Jung as a serial rapist until after I left, because we were not allowed to Google anything to do with the cult when we were in. They said that would be like spiritual suicide. And, they implant all these phobias in your mind about doubt and how lethal that is to you spiritually. And so you're really, they completely control that information once you're in. But from the outside, they will tell you they're about something completely different, and eventually they'll tell you they're Christians, because that has some kind of credibility. And a lot of cults call this heavenly deception. It's that the idea that the ends justify the means. So whatever tactics, ethical or not, that you can use to indoctrinate someone to get them to join are justified, because at the end of the day, you're saving their eternal souls. And so it's all worth it. And that's kind of the ideology that they use when they're recruiting. And it is deeply deceptive. It is deeply, deeply deceptive.
Yeah, I have heard a lot of that through other groups and people that I've interviewed. And Mormonism does that too. When a lot of people say, how could you possibly convert to Mormonism with all of the information that's out there right now? But when the missionaries go and knock on your door, first of all, they're like 18, 19, 20. So they're kids, and you don't want to just leave them standing there in their little suits. And so you invite them in and they tell you, we want you to be a part of our community. And if you love Jesus, then this is the book for you. We have an additional testament of Jesus, and it seems to make a lot of sense, but they're not going to tell you about the problematic history.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that Mormonism had another testament as well. I'm assuming written by the leader. Yeah,
so the Book of Mormon, that's what that is. It's another testament of Christ that was written/translated by the founder, Joseph Smith. And I have noticed so many similarities and parallels between our two leaders.
Wow.
Because
Yeah.
it seems like the same type of thing that's going on now with JMS would be going on today if Joseph Smith were still alive, because he was also a sexual predator.
Was
and that
he
was
really?
Yeah. Yeah, so his whole thing was bringing polygamy back to the earth, and he had all these spiritual brides and young children, like 14 years old. So yeah, sisters, same thing with JMS. And he would say, no, it's a spiritual thing. I mean, he didn't claim he was Jesus, but he claimed that he was better than Jesus. So,
that's similar to our leader, my old leader as well. Like, he claimed, and it's insane, right? It's delusional, it's psychopathic, it's narcissistic, it's grandiose, but he claimed that Jesus had failed in his mission and that he had basically been given the mantle to actually succeed. And so in the group, Jesus actually, he starts as a figurehead for people who don't understand what it's about, because they have that trust in, well, this is a known, divine figure. And then once you're in deep enough, they pivot and they say, actually, Jesus isn't all that. He failed, and this guy is the one that we need to follow, to pray to treat as if he's God. It's wild. Yeah. And they do, like, the methods they use as well, where they target people in vulnerable phases of life. I know that, I don't think it's Mormonism, but another similar cult used the method of, they would troll the death notices in the paper. And this I learned from Rick Ross, because he's deprogrammed so many different people from so many different cults. But they would troll the death notices in the paper, and they would target families who'd recently lost a loved one, and they'd door knock at their homes, because they understood that these people are in more vulnerable phases of life. They're questioning a lot, probably, and they're more likely to accept the love and kindness of strangers than they normally would be.
Wow.
Which just, I feel, so beautifully illustrates how strategic they are when they look at recruiting victims.
Yeah, I don't think that Mormon missionaries look at the newspapers. However,
I don't think they do.
I will say, if they go to a home and they find out someone has just passed, they will absolutely use that in their favor, because the big thing about Mormonism is the plan of salvation, and you can be with your family forever if you do X, Y, and Z. The first thing is getting baptized, and then getting your temple recommend, which it requires giving 10% of your income to the church. So they definitely, and I want to say this, that the missionaries do this with the purest of intentions, because they always think, oh, wow, your family has passed. Well, I have the answer where you can be with them. And so they truly believe that. But I just can't imagine them intentionally going out and deceiving people, knowing that that's not the case, and knowing that there is something far more devious happening once they recruit these people in.
Absolutely. And it is hard to believe. Like, it's really hard to believe. And honestly, most people in cults, and I can say this for the JMS cult, the vast majority of people and who are going out and trying to recruit people or trying to induct people do believe that they are doing everything for the purpose of saving this person and, furthering the mission that they truly deeply believe in with everything they have. And I think that's the horrible thing about cults, is that they take advantage and hijack the best parts of human nature and they twist them for their own purposes. And so what would have been such a beautiful motive, which is saving people, which is helping people, which is, introducing people to what they think is the truth, it's unfortunately so evil in the grand scheme of things, but the people themselves have the best of intentions.
Yeah.
And even though, in JMS, they were using direct tactics of deception and were being intentionally manipulative, they still believed, like I said, that the end justifies the means. And they understood that if we tell them what we know from the beginning, they will run for the hills. But we believe that this is true and right and correct. And these people believe that, to the point of dying for the cause. So So they will use whatever tactics, you know, are available to them. And it's not that these people come up with those tactics on their own. And I'm sure that's the case for Mormonism. It's the leaders at the top who disseminate these recruitment strategies, and they're using, you know, impure motives. They're using, you know, they're intentionally wanting to prey on people. But the way that they pitch it to the followers down the chain is that you are doing something that's godly and heavenly and you're saving people's souls. So yeah, it is evil. But it's that tone is set at the top, not at the bottom.
Yeah, no, it's true. I just had someone reach out to me on Instagram and they were like, hey, a missionary just reached out to me on Instagram and I feel really weird about it. Normally I would ignore it, but having watched your show, I feel like I want to help this person, but I don't know what to say. And they're taught to use social media to reach out to people with the guise of looking for friends. And they'll say, hey, I'm new to the area. I see you've lived here for a while. Do you have any suggestions? And they just act like they're looking for a friend, and it disarms people. But if they were out the gate to be like, I'm from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and I want to tell you about the true gospel of Christ, everyone would be like, okay, bye. So yeah, they're telling these kids to use social media now to get under people's defenses.
Trying to stay relevant. Yeah.
Right.
That is really, really interesting. And I'm sure most cults, you know, have adapted in that way. I haven't been in JMS for, you know, over 10 years. So I don't know from the inside, but I'm sure that they're using methods through social media, through whatever medium they can, that's relevant to the demographic they're trying to target, which is young people.
Yeah. And speaking of, I want to get back to your story. So you start going to Bible study with them. Can you talk to us about the lifestyle changes that were happening during this time and how much more devoted you were getting to the cause? Yeah,
absolutely. So throughout the course of the Bible studies, and that took me, I'm going to say 5 months, I believe. So I met them in February of that year, 2011, and I was fully indoctrinated by around June. And so throughout the course of the 30 lessons that I mentioned earlier, which is where they start to weave their doctrine and ideology into, you know, the Christian kind of doctrine and ideology, and slowly change the way that you think about the Bible and certain verses and whatever else. They also start to introduce behavior change. You're getting closer to these people. You're starting to trust them more. Like, it took me a while, but, you know, and you have wobbly moments where you're like, hang on a minute. But for me, you know, I got past those because the love that they were showing me, the love bombing, the attention, the care, was something that I really needed in my life at that time, and something they took advantage of. So throughout, you know, they gained my trust. I really started to look up to them, and they seemed to be a group that really practiced what they preach. Like, they were so committed to what they believed, which was what I thought was Christianity. But they would get up, you know, 2 or 3 a.m. to pray every morning without fail. They'd pray for hours. They would go out and evangelize on the street for hours a day. Sometimes they would, you know, have a church service every day. They'd have a prayer meeting every Friday night. They'd have their Sunday service. And they kind of lived and breathed the doctrine and their belief in God. And I was so inspired by that. I guess my personality is that, you know, if I'm passionate about something, I'm really, really passionate about it. And because I've been brought up in Christianity and raised to believe that the greatest thing you can dedicate your life to is God and Jesus and that message, you know, this was so inspiring to me. And so I began to be influenced by their suggestions and take them up on the behavior changes they suggested to me, which at first was you could get up a little earlier to pray. And they said, you don't have to get up at 2 or 3 a.m. You could get up at 5 a.m. to pray. But, you know, getting that prayer time early in the morning is really important. And I was like, I trust you guys. Like, that does sound important. That sounds noble. And, you know, the pursuit of getting closer to God through prayer and intentionally doing it and like setting a condition every morning seemed like something that, you know, God wanted me to do. because you start to interpret everything through the lens of God's giving you a sign, you know, and so I started getting up early, and then the sleep deprivation was a major kind of it's a major tool that cults use, and these guys use it especially. So once I started to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and pray late at night, and, you know, your sleep is dramatically reduced. And one of the main things that they would teach was that actually you don't need that much sleep. You really only need 3 or 4 hours a night.
Oh, no.
It's more heavenly. It's more noble to use that time to pray instead. You know, let God give you energy. And I didn't realize, but, you know, sleep deprivation is a number one tool that cults use, because it kind of shuts off your ability to really question very well. You're less alert. You're not processing your emotions properly. You're not processing information properly, and you're much more suggestible. And so from then on, when I was, you know, being deprived of sleep, they wanted me to spend a lot more time around them. And I thought, this must be what God wants, you know, lots of prayer and reading the Bible and all that. And so not only was I sleep deprived, but I was undergoing immersion, in which I was constantly spending time around them, absorbing information from them, spending less time around people on the outside, around my friends and family. And so that was really when the brainwashing tactics started to kick in, and I started to be much more open and suggestible to the new information they were feeding me. Mm-hmm. I hope that all makes sense. It's really hard to explain. It's quite complex. But I guess, it just happens over a very long period of time. And it happens in stages. But at the end, you do end up believing what they want you to believe if everything goes according to plan.
Right. And you were hand selected because you're tall and beautiful. And do you feel like they were really specifically targeting you and grooming you for the leader?
Yes. I don't just think it, I know. And that's because as soon as I was fully inducted, as soon as I decided, or I thought I had decided, but actually really my decision had very little to do with it, that I believed in this group and I believed that JMS was the Messiah. They had said to me, we've already sent him your picture. They'd sent it to him months ago. Wow. You know, probably in the first couple months that I was getting to know these people, you know, they'd take pictures and it'd be fun. Like, oh, we're all getting a photo together. They'd already sent him my picture while he was in prison. So he got it in prison. And this happens all across the world. This cult will send pictures of their current members and their new recruits. And basically he will go through all these photos and he will pick out the women that he wants. And so he'd already decided that he wanted me to be what they call an evergreen, probably a few months before I fully joined. And what an evergreen means, or in another term for it was faith star, is basically that you will never get married. You will basically live like a nun.
Wow.
And you will belong to him. And my take at that time was, you know, this is an amazing thing to be chosen for. The Messiah of this time period, which I know sounds insane talking about it now, but that was what I believed then. The Messiah of this time period wants me to be fully dedicated to him, and he's handpicked and chosen me. Like, that felt like an amazing honor. And I was so naive and innocent that I just thought that was a spiritual concept, you know, that I was to be his like spiritual bride that was specially chosen, almost like this mission, you know, to just work for him and, you know, dedicate my life to him. I didn't know at all that he was a sexual predator.
Right.
At all. I didn't know until I came out. So once I was fully inducted, the leader told me, we've already sent you his picture and he has a letter for you. And I don't remember the exact letter, and we were never allowed to keep those letters because the leader would keep them all in her laptop. And I understand now that was, if anyone left, you know, you don't want letters of that nature getting out.
Right.
Because a lot of them were very sexually charged. But at the beginning, his letters weren't sexually charged to me at all. It was just, you know, something along the lines of, hi, Liz, you know, I'm so happy that you've joined this mission. You know, you need to work hard. You need to dedicate yourself to this. and I want you to be a faith star, and I love you. And that was probably more or less the essence of the letter. And so, yeah, I was picked out to be I guess more or less part of his harem.
What's going through your mind when first they introduced this character as the Messiah, because it took months for them to do that, right? So what's going through your mind when they tell you JMS is the true Messiah, returned, and he wants you to be his bride? How are you taking all of this?
When they told me at first, I was really shocked. Obviously, the faith that I'd grown up in, this was completely blasphemous. And they had prepared me and primed me for this information, like I said, for months in the lead up. And so I was in the best position possible, I think, to receive that information. But I still was like, hold up, like this is different to what I've heard before. At that point, I already trusted them a lot. I was spending most of my time with them, and I believed everything else they told me. And the Bible studies seemed to be building up to this kind of grand finale that I wasn't sure, what it was. And so this information was kind of like, okay, this is what you've been building up to this whole time.
Right.
But I think I was in a bit of a state of shock when they first told me. And so they were like, go home and pray about it, just ask God. And so I went home and I prayed for hours in tears, just being like, God, please tell me whether or not this is something that you want me to believe, something that's true. And I felt like, for lack of a better phrase, divinely inspired to go to my parents' bookshelf and pick up a book that I hadn't picked up in years, that was written by someone who identified as a Christian prophet. And I opened it to the first page that it opened to when I pulled it out. And the first line that I read was something along the lines of like, the time has come for God's brides to stand up. Wow. And I was like, what how? If anything, this is God telling me this is it. And I, to this day, have no way of explaining why or how. I don't get it, but I know that a number of people that I've spoken to have come out of cults since have had similar experiences. And I feel like it's something to do with, when you're primed and suggestible, you will read into signs much more deeply than someone who's not. And it will be according to the framework that they've instilled in your psyche. But that was just the wildest coincidence.
Can't, Liz, that's insane. Like, that's not just taking out of context. That it literally says bride in there. Like, bride. I don't know how you would have taken it any other way. Honestly, like, it's just, that's wild to me. It gave me goosebumps when you said it, and I hate that it did, because I was just like, whoa, that's crazy.
I know.
That's crazy.
Wait, maybe it was all real. No, I'm kidding.
I don't know. I have no way to explain this, but I just have to say that what you described is so common, and I've been through it, where when you get to that deep, dark part of your soul and you're crying and you're upset because you want it to make sense so badly, but it doesn't, and there's that conflicted desire there where your brain, your logical side, is saying, no, 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 no. All of your alarm bells are going off. And your heart and the things that they have taught you and the things that they've told you and your spiritual experiences are saying yes, yes, yes. And there is just this war in your head and in your heart. And it's so hard to distinguish. And you just want so badly for that feeling to go away. And the easiest way to make it go away is to just ignore it. And just pretend it didn't happen and just be like, you know what? This is all for the best. I clearly just don't get it yet. I'm sure I'm going to grow into it. These people clearly understand. What's wrong with me to not understand? So I've been there and I understand that. And when people say, how could you just, fall for that? It's so much more complicated. If you haven't been through that depth of the soul, just like groveling on the ground, asking for help, if you haven't been there, it's really, really hard to understand. So I just always ask people who are listening, who have never been a part of a high control group, just to be sympathetic and understanding and be open to the possibility that things may not always be in your control, even though you think that could never happen to me, it absolutely can happen to you. And the second that you say it can't happen to you, you're probably more vulnerable because you're not paying attention to the signs or what's going on around you. So I just have to point that out because it is such a common thing, and I get it, and I've been there, and it's so hard.
I so appreciate that you get it, and that, like you absolutely hit the nail on the head. That is how it works. And it's just so many things I want to say about that. Like, there are so many things I want to say about that. You know, no one joins a cult. We know this. That's repeated multiple times in the ex-cult world. But that people don't want to believe that they would be susceptible to the advances of a cult or to indoctrination or brainwashing, because that's not a nice feeling to have, that you could be susceptible to that. But I remember, you know, having worked with Rick Ross, and he's done, I think, thousands of deprogrammings over the course of his career, and he is so good at it and he's so switched on. But one of the sentences that he used when we were doing a deprogramming together was that even though he's done so many deprogrammings, the more he does, the more he realizes that even he wouldn't be immune to the advances of a cult if it was the right place, the right time, and he was in the right headspace or the wrong headspace. But even he doesn't believe that he's immune, and he is an expert in the field. So yeah, the average person, you know, it's honestly, so much of it is just a case of wrong place, wrong time, wrong stage in your life. Yeah. And they know that, and they take advantage of that. They look for vulnerabilities intentionally. Right. I remember that when I was in, we all had to recruit, and I thankfully, thank God, never ended up recruiting anybody. I think I wasn't willing to be as manipulative as they tried to tell us to be. Like, it felt like I was lying. I will admit that. We were taught to lie through our teeth, but a lot of it did feel difficult to go through with. But I remember we would, you know, get up early, we'd pray, we'd have our morning service, and our leader would pull out a whiteboard with the names of all the people that we were talking to, that we were trying to recruit at the time, most of them women, of course, and they would be at various stages of, you know, just met them, having coffee catch-ups, doing Bible studies, joined a front group, something like that. And this leader would systematically go through each one of the names, and she would talk to the person in the cult who was interacting with them, who was trying to pull them in, and she would ask them questions about this potential new recruit. You know, what are they like? What do they believe in? What do they care about? And then she would hone in and say, what are their traumas? What are their pain points? What bad things have happened to them in their life? What problems do they need solving? And then she would say, well, I need you to target them like this. I need you to approach it like this. If they're not religious, then you need to give them some kind of philosophical answer to their problems, or you need to make them feel loved. It was all according to the vulnerabilities that they had, not their strengths. That's how strategic they are. Like, it's so manipulative. And yeah, and they know what they're doing. They've done it for years and years. But also, like, I so agree with what you said, and just the fact that you have these instances of cognitive dissonance where something will happen, like you're getting told something by them, and then you're not sure, and your understanding is a little different. And when your trust is firmly planted in them, when they've got you in that deep, then immediately the conflicting feeling or idea is null and void, because they're getting their authority from God. So of course you're going to take what they say as law. Right. And they systematically shut down your ability to connect with your intuition and your feelings and your ability to protect yourself. They make you so vulnerable. And that's been a massive thing. I don't know about you, but like for me, getting back in touch with my intuition has been so hard. Like it's literally taken me like 11 years, you know? Right. And a big part of that I found was anger was a really, really important emotion that they shut down right from the beginning. You're not allowed to be angry. That's an ugly emotion, and it means something's wrong with you. Something's in you that's evil. You're rebelling. there's something that you need to shut down there. And for me, kind of resurrecting my ability to feel anger and to understand that that's a compass and a signal that something's not right, that my boundaries are being crossed in some way. That's been massively key in healing. But yeah, how have you found that, like in terms of intuition and the cognitive dissonance and all of that?
Yeah, it's tricky because with you said they say anger is the thing you need to shut down. And I don't know if Mormonism does that, but they use this heavy blanket of guilt and shame to kind of keep you down. So they'll tell you...
And that's powerful. That's so powerful.
Because it's innate. So like when they groom you to feel that way about the smallest things, and when you don't get something, it's not anger that you go to, it's shame. When you're like, why am I the weird one? I'm not doing something right. This doesn't feel right, but everyone else is doing it. So I'm ashamed that I'm not worthy enough to receive the spirit of the Holy Ghost. Or I'm ashamed that I'm not praying enough because God isn't answering my prayers. Or Heavenly Father. They don't really say God that often. So when you're confronted with information, for example, about the church, I went through a lot of angry phases, but mostly it was relief because I knew that I could let go of that shame now. When I found out all of the things about the early prophets and the history of the church and how it was just literally made up, I was like, I can drop this feeling now. And it took a while. It wasn't like immediately gone, but because you're still terribly afraid that what if I'm wrong and now I'm going to outer darkness. They don't even call it hell. They have like their own thing. But it's it takes a while to start to listen to yourself and figure out what you truly believe in and not what they wanted you to believe in, because I was born and raised in it. So, it's just
so like that's a different kettle of fish altogether. Like you had no opportunity to think outside of that framework. Your entire life, which is just like, I admire so much that you've questioned enough and got the strength to leave, because I can't imagine how terrifying it would be, to leave that from birth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that
That's incredible.
There's things that I can admire too about you being a convert, because what I've noticed, especially in Mormonism, when people convert to it, they're even more devout than the ones that were born and raised and kind of like, I was raised in it, I don't know if I believe it. But the converts, they really believe it, or else they wouldn't have changed around their whole life just for this group. So there's a lot of different things on both sides. But getting back to your story, after you started conversing with JMS, what were the next steps? Did he want to meet with you?
Yes, he did. So he would kind of send me a letter maybe every week, and I was encouraged to write to him all the time, every day. Everyone was encouraged to write to him, but especially the evergreens, and there were quite a few of them in the group that I was in the particular location I was in. And eventually he started saying, you should come to Korea. And I was like, oh my God, he wants me to come to Korea. And what he says goes, right? So my leader was like, we need to plan a Korea trip. Like we're all going to Korea.
I am wondering if they are paying for these flights for these women to go back and forth, or was that on you to pay for your own flight?
Oh, that was on us. Yeah, we had to pay for our own. Absolutely. We paid for everything. I left with nothing when I left. I didn't have any savings, any assets, nothing. Everything you own is property of the group and of JMS. So we funded the trip ourselves. I think in certain instances, if someone is in a financial position where they can't actually pay for the trip, and JMS has specifically requested that he wants this person to visit, then the group will pull together and, pull funds and get them over there, because, he's God, right? Got to do what he says. But I had, a small amount of savings because I was working at the time. So I used those to go to Korea.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. No one makes money except for the people at the top.
Right.
And they have deep pockets, but that is all at the top. But yeah, JMS had asked for me to come to Korea specifically. And he wanted to meet me. And so he also had wanted a couple of other people to meet him from the group at the time. And so we started planning a trip. And at this point, of course, I was fully indoctrinated. We had my ceremony. Like when you're fully indoctrinated and inducted, you'll have a initiation ceremony, which is just kind of like a celebration, I guess, but it's a bit formal. I was spending more and more time with the group. I was spending heaps of time with them. I eventually ended up moving in with them. And much to my mum's concern, because she was getting concerned at how much time I was spending with these people. But I was like, well, these are Christians, and isn't this what you want for me? And of course, I believed that I'd been chosen for this mission. And they also tell you that, anyone outside of a group, Satan will use to try and get you to not believe.
Right.
And so, Satan's working through your mum, Satan's working through your friends, Satan's working through your dad, like whatever. And so I inherently, was on guard with my mum, because I just thought Satan's going to use her to try and talk me out of being involved and make me question things, and I can't open myself up to that. And so I did move out of the house so that they wanted me to get that separation from my family, because at that time, of course, I was still living with my family. And I was barely allowed to see them. I was occasionally allowed to go for dinner or something like that if there was a birthday on, and so I did go visit mum's place for dinner at one point, and she dropped me back at the house that the cult was staying at, and she pulled out a bunch of papers that I'd accidentally left under my bed before I moved out. And this was a sermon or some kind of revelation or sermon from the cult. And through that, she had been able to identify through Googling and things like that what my group was about that I joined.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And cults do not want anyone knowing. And I, of course, hadn't Googled the group, because they told me that was an absolute no, you do not do that, because it's full of blasphemy and you'll get infected. Mm-hmm. And so she pulled out all of these research papers while she was in the car. I was outside the house, and she said, Liz, I just wanted to show you these things. I think you should have a look at them. And I was like, absolutely not. I literally full body fear response. I was like, this is terrifying. My faith, my eternal life is being threatened right now. And I was like, get those papers away from me. I do not want to read them. I can't look at those, and I'd never want you to bring this up with me again. I got out, I slammed the car door, I ran inside, and mum obviously was alarmed by that response.
Right.
I told my leader what had happened as soon as possible, because of course we had to report anything like that to our leader. Oh. And my mum went back for backup. She got my dad to come round with her, and my dad started banging on the front door, and, so they were like, go hide in the cupboard. And so I had to hide in the cupboard while another leader went to the front door, answered it, pretending to be really nice, but she pretended she couldn't speak English at all. So Dad was like, where's Elizabeth? Where's my daughter? And she was like, oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know her. Just broken English. And she shut the door, and he was yelling outside. It was all pretty scary. And they were like, whatever you do, don't come out. Satan's using your parents, and you just need to get away from them. And so they stayed outside for a while, and my leader was like, the trip to Korea was in a couple of days' time, and she was like, we need to get out of here now. So she and a few other members packed me into a van. I had to pack everything really quickly, put me into they had this big van. They threw a blanket over me, and they drove out of Canberra, and we went to stay with some members in Sydney before we hopped on the plane to Korea.
Wow.
Because they were scared that my parents were still out there and looking for me, and if they saw me getting taken away, then obviously they would have called the police. Unfortunately, the police can't do anything. when it comes to coercion, that they have very little, to work with. But yeah, so then I ended up staying with those members for a couple nights, and then we went to Korea the very next day.
What was that like for you? Because you have your parents whom you love and you trust, and then you have this group who has kind of stolen your love and your trust. You must have had another conflicting moment there, trying to figure out who to believe or who to run to.
Definitely. For a while there I did. And that was hard, but the cult knows how to deal. Like they have strategies to deal with parents and with people that you're close to outside. And so eventually I came to believe that obviously Satan was using my mum and she wasn't safe. My dad at this point, he was kind of out of the picture. He has Alzheimer's. So he was like, just starting to get sick, and he really wasn't very cognizant of what was happening. So my poor mum, like a lot of it fell on her. But the issue was that she really started to express concern from the beginning, and that immediately flagged her as a tool of Satan with the cult from the very beginning. So a big priority for them was getting distance between me and my mum. And this is something that I still counsel parents if they have, a kid stuck in the group. You cannot raise alarm bells. It's intuitive to want to do that, to want to appeal to your child's common sense and say, hey, something's weird, like you're acting different, what's going on? Like, tell me what's happening. But that actually makes you a target. And so, so I guess by that point, I was fully brainwashed with the belief that my mother was being used by Satan and she was problematic, and that I had to distance myself. And I mean, there are verses in the actual Bible that support that. I forget the specific verse, but it's like, I came, not with peace, but with a sword. I came to separate, father from son and mother from daughter and brother from sister, and anyone who doesn't deny their family and friends and pick up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And so, not only was I raised with those beliefs, but the cult also uses those verses to justify that. So, I was willing to do whatever it took to, I guess, keep distance from my mum, because I believed that she was a threat to my spirit. And so she didn't even know I was in Korea. I told her that I'd gone to Perth for a holiday, and at that point, that was really when, I stopped being allowed to see her much at all.
Wow. Okay. So what happens when you get to Korea? This is probably the moment that everyone's like, just get to it. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. It's a good question. So I was in Korea for about 3 weeks, I'd say, back in 2012. And we stayed with a family in Seoul initially. And there was this thing that we had to do, which was like set conditions. And basically what it was you had to impose upon yourself, I guess, various forms of for lack of a better word, torture, so that you were kind of like feeling the pain of what Jung was going through. So our perception was he's in prison. He's in prison because he's being persecuted, just like Jesus was persecuted. They use the persecution tool in the persecution card in many cults. And so he's carrying the cross right now. And, we're all just waiting for him to come out. But he's going through a lot. He's in prison. He's living in horrible conditions, whatever. And we were encouraged to set various conditions, especially the evergreens, because we were supposed to be so close to him. And so the conditions that I had set, which was encouraged by my leader, was obviously getting up super early to pray, like 2 a.m. And then it was also, I was taking cold showers. And at this point, I had an eating disorder before. I'd healed from it, but I was in a vulnerable phase when I was recruited. And then because of the immense psychological, mental stress and the abuse that was starting to take an impact, I was losing weight again, and I was having trouble keeping it on. And so cold water was really, cold showers are really hard. And that was in summer in Australia. When I got to Korea, I still had to maintain that condition because I was just about to meet him, I had to maintain the condition of having cold showers there in like the dead of winter. So we arrived, we stayed with this family. Most of us slept on the floor. In Seoul, we went to the Ewha Women's University, which is a massive, like one of the main places that JMS recruits, and met a bunch of members there. It's sad how many members were there. And I had to continue having these cold showers, which was pretty much pouring like ice cold water on myself. I remember crying because it physically hurt. Wow. I nearly passed out because the water was so cold that it was almost like I had a brain freeze outside of my skull. And so, yeah, we spent time in Seoul, and then we went to Wonmyeongdong, which is where the cult has its headquarters. It's like almost like a commune out in the South Korean countryside. And yeah, we went out there and actually stayed there for a while. We stayed in a shipping container, slept on the floor again, and we'd get up at 2 a.m., trudge through the snow. I'd have a cold shower. And then we'd go hiking. We would pray. They have this whole network of caves out in the countryside that they've built. And we know now that a lot of victims have come forward and said they were raped in those caves. But we were told it was just a place to pray. And there's a lot out there, giant statues of Jesus, giant statues of Jung. It's just like this whole weird otherworldly community. And so we spent a lot of time out there. And then I forget which point this was, but of course I went to visit him in prison. And so I went with a couple of other members and also the head of the cult, who is also now in prison. She was the head of the cult when he was in prison. So she was supposed to be like his mouthpiece. And she was a groomer. She's, on trial for that at the moment. But she accompanied us. And this woman, people don't have much money in this group, but at the top they have deep pockets. And she was dripping in designer clothing, She'd drive black armored vans. She had bodyguards. Most of the churches in Seoul were you couldn't see them from the street. They'd be underground or something like that. I'm going everywhere with this. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah, so we were accompanied by her to visit him in prison. We waited in the waiting room, and then we were brought in, and he was behind plexiglass with a guard, supervising him, and we were on the other side. And I mean, the sense that I had was holy shit, I'm talking to the Messiah.
Right.
This is, I don't even know how I'm supposed to feel, but I thought that I was supposed to feel more. I thought that I was supposed to feel something, divine, but I sort of was just I should be feeling really in awe right now. And I guess I was in a way, but yeah, he didn't speak English, so he translated through our leader. And he said things like, make sure you take these girls out, treat them well, buy them things. He just had basic conversation with us, stared at us a lot, blew us kisses, and then the 20 minutes was up and he was escorted out, and that was the end of that visit.
Oh, that just gave me a gross heebie-jeebie feeling of imagining him blowing kisses through the glass. The audacity to collect more brides while you're in prison for raping women. It's just, it's unbelievable to me. I can't comprehend it.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely disgusting again. And he used to tell us, I remember him writing a letter to me saying that he strokes our photos from the wall of his cell. He's just, obviously this is an obsession for him. And yeah, he'd write me really sexually suggestive letters after that point where I visited him. And yeah, the tone started to change a little after I met him. In terms of the communications that I had with him. But I was so naive that I still continue to think that this is all spiritual. He's our spiritual husband. I never for a second thought this guy is molesting people and he wants to do the same thing to me. I don't know how I didn't, but I just didn't.
Well, I can understand that because you're so deep in at this point, and they've conditioned you to believe a certain way. And so to question that would mean questioning your entire reality, not just him, not just the letter.
That's true.
And so it makes sense that you would just go along with it, and you probably tried to make it make sense in your head each time, even if you felt a little uncomfortable. It was probably, I'm the problem. I just need to figure this out because...
Absolutely.
Right, because that's what they've taught you to do. So at what point were you able to be shaken awake by what was going on?
Yeah, that took a while. And I was lucky because I was lucky and I was unlucky. As I mentioned, I had the eating disorder, and what I haven't mentioned yet is that they believed that the rupture was due to happen according to these numerological prophecies in 2012, at the end of 2012. And so 2012 was the most intense year, a lot of victims have said when they've come out, like for everyone across the world in this cult, because the doctrine was you need to perfect yourself so that you can rapture. And the rapture isn't physical, it's spiritual. And so we were going hard, and the mental and physical abuse and the psychological abuse really escalated. The intensity of the work that we were doing escalated. Our sleep declined. And they started introducing things like, because we had to be perfect, we could barely sleep because we needed to be praying, and we had to repent all the time and try and cleanse ourselves and write to him all the time and, run all these services, evangelize for hours every day. Like the work was insane. We were getting 4 to 6 hours of sleep at night, if that. And we would spend hours and hours every day working for the group. And then if we had to also go to work, like many of us, I had to quit uni because I couldn't continue to do that and everything that I was required to do in the group. And so, yes, at one point, they started introducing like health rules as well, started restricting what we could eat. We were getting up at, like I said, about 2 a.m. and we weren't allowed to eat breakfast until 12. And so that's a solid, 10 hours you're up with no food. We weren't allowed to drink coffee, alcohol. You have to fast for 3 days if you drink a sip of alcohol. So obviously that was off the table. And for me, in recovering from, my eating disorder, I really relied on meal structure and timing and certain foods to feel safe to do that, especially as I was getting sicker and declining more in the group. And so that really kind of took the bottom out from my ability to stay well physically. And so I started to really lose a lot of weight. Like I was pretty emaciated at the point that I came out. I think my BMI was 15. Like it was bad. And the doctor had told me my heart was going to stop if I didn't get help. And I did end up having to go to the emergency room one morning because I'm not going to tell you the gory details of this, but basically my bowels had stopped working because the muscle inside of me, my heart muscle, all my internal organs, including my intestines, had started to waste away.
Oh, that's awful.
So I was literally I was so constipated that I could have died. Like my bowel could have torn.
Jeez.
And so, at that point, I had to get a colonoscopy done, and it did a lot of damage to my bowel. I was incredibly sick. I was walking to uni to evangelize and then sort of collapsing on the street and then just getting back up and continuing on again. Like it was, I would have a panic attack out of nowhere, and then I would just pick myself up, put the Cheshire Cat smile on again because we had to be smiling all the time, and continue doing whatever work that I was tasked with doing. And throughout all this, my leader would say, it's your own sin that's making you sick. You need to repent. It's evil that you're doing this. And she would also say things like, you can't go to your parents for help. And at this point, my life was at risk. You can't go to your parents for help because they don't care about you. I care about you way more than your parents do, way more than they ever will. And this, I just, I was so unwell. And I remember writing a letter to my leader at that time being like, I'm not trying to get sick. I don't know how to stop this. all I can think is that I want to be dead, and I don't know why, and I know that's evil, and I'm so sorry, but I need help. And there was no help. There was no help. And at that point, yeah, like I said, my life was at risk. And this was again over the course of, like, I'd been in the cult for about 1.5 years, or maybe nearly 2 years at this point. And, we're still running the modeling shows, working for hours and hours every day. And I was just wasting away, and Jung had written to me and said, you don't look pretty anymore. And she would weigh us, like she'd weigh all of us. And she was telling most people to lose weight. And for me, you have to put on weight. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Oh. Like, I don't know how I was so sick at that point. And, it felt like hell. And, I really needed to go to hospital, and it took months before I was allowed. I still wasn't allowed to see my parents. My mum would come over once, she came over once, and she was like, you look so sick, she was so worried about me. And I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm all good. I'm fine. And she talked to the other members, and they were like, no, Liz is doing great. And I was not. And then eventually, because I was so sick, I was so weak, I was unable to continue working to the standard that they wanted me to work to. They said, fine, go to hospital. I just wasn't useful to them anymore. Like, I was the burden, if anything. So they allowed me to go to hospital. And I spent about 3 weeks in hospital.
Wow.
And I was still incredibly brainwashed at that point. And I remember thinking, like, if I can just go to hospital, get fed, top myself up for a few weeks, and then come back, I'd fully kind of come around to the idea and made the decision for myself, because I believed so deeply that I cannot leave this. I'm just terrified to. Mm-hmm. I'll probably die when I get back, because there are no supports in place for me. I don't know how to recover on my own. I'm cut off from all modes of help, and any services that I might be able to access, but it might help me to keep going for a little bit longer if I can just get myself into hospital. Yeah. And so I do think that if I hadn't left in the way that I did, I probably would have died, because I was already on the way. But what happened was, when I got to hospital, I was still brainwashed. I would still get up, 3 or 4 in the morning at this point, asleep in, and the nurses would be like, go back to sleep, go back to sleep. And I was like, no, I'm not going back to sleep. And, I'd spend time translating editing sermons that were translated from Korean, and reading through their information, listening to their music. Like, we weren't allowed to access or listen to or read any other information aside from what was in the group. And so I spent my whole time just continuing to immerse myself in that world, because I was terrified of not doing that, what would happen. And they convinced me. I stayed for about 3 weeks. They convinced me to go back and stay with my mum. Mm-hmm. And she had been working behind the scenes 4 months. And I didn't know that at this point. But what she had done was, she'd found a way to get in contact with Rick Alan Ross, the deprogrammer in the United States. And she had arranged for him to come fly over and deprogram me. Now, that was supposed to happen in December of 2012. However, it was planned for a family holiday that initially I was allowed to go to, but then at the very last minute, my leader told me, it'll be bad for your soul, you can't go on that family holiday. So I had to stay in Canberra, and that plan fell through. Then I ended up in hospital just after Christmas, and that was when Mum rearranged everything. And she's my hero. Like,
she's amazing.
She saved my life. She's incredible. And I can't imagine what she went through. I think she's still quite traumatized from that whole experience, watching me waste away and couldn't do anything. And so she had convinced the psychiatrist at the hospital, who didn't believe I was in a cult, by the way. He just thought she was being paranoid.
What?
Yeah, he didn't listen to her. But he did say, I think it would be good if you went back to your mum's place for a couple of weeks. And I thought, I don't want to, but I'm also so terrified to go back to the group, because if I go back, I think I'm going to die. I don't think I can, I don't know how I'm going to survive for much longer. Maybe this will buy me a little bit more time again. And so went back home with Mum. And then it was maybe a couple mornings after I'd come back, I woke up and, this strange man was at the door, and he was wearing like Nikes, socks pulled up to his knees, shorts, like cargo shorts with like a polo shirt tucked in, carrying a briefcase. And I was like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, who is he? And my uncle walks in after him, which is a strategic move, because if you can bring in a family member or friend that you don't want to act weird around, like, and you feel like you need to be polite with, that's a really good move. If it was just my mum, you know.
Right.
And he was like, hi, Liz, I'm here to talk to you. Your mum's brought me here and she's hoping that we can just have a conversation. Like, he was very, you know, non-threatening,
casual.
but I knew what was going on. Like, I knew and we'd been warned about this. And I was like, this is death, you know, spiritually to me. But I was so sick at that point. I didn't have much fight left in me.
Right.
And so I said, Mum, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm going for a walk. And I was putting my shoes on. I remember she came into my room, and she's not a hugger, really. Like, you know, she's not very that way inclined, but she grabbed hold of me and she just like was hugging me tightly, and I could feel that she was trembling. And she was like, Liz, whatever you do, please come back. And for some reason, that got through to me. I went for a walk. I came back, I sat down, and Rick Ross, it took about 3 days, but he slowly deprogrammed me. And that was an excruciatingly painful experience. But eventually I got to the point where I said, okay, I can recognize that this is a cult. Please just tell me everything you know about them. Yeah.
Wow. Liz, so I'm over here tearing up because your mom is amazing.
Sorry.
And she's amazing. Like, I'm tearing up because I'm just like, your mom. I love her.
Amazing. I love her so much. I know.
Wow.
I know.
Just like the lengths that she was willing to go. And I cannot imagine what that must have been like for you. In 3 days, that's a fast track to deprogramming and deconstruction.
Absolutely.
What was that like?
So it was, again, very strategic, and essentially what it is immersion in information that kind of undoes the brainwashing, because it's immersing you in information that is contrary to what you've been told. But the thing is that it's almost like it's a very complex process and very, very tricky to get right, because you need to give them enough information, but especially at the beginning, you can't get their alarm bells up because they will run away.
Right.
And, having done deprogrammings with Rick Ross since, we had one that was successful and one that fell through because the alarm bells went up and he was out of there straight away. So the trick is really getting them to sit down in the first instance, which he did with me by being very non-threatening, or as non-threatening as possible. And what he started with was not information about the group that I was in, which again would have made me run for the hills. But he started with general information about different cults. And so what that did, you get it. Yeah.
I love it.
So what that did was like, look at these crazy people.
Right.
Look at the shit that they've done. Look at how they recruit people. Look at the tactics they use. Look at the ways that they make you think.
Yeah.
And there's only so many times that you can hear that information and go, yeah, that is insane. And those people are crazy, but my group's different. Yes. So that is how he gets around that kind of the phobia, thought-stopping blocks that they've, hardwired into you, sorry. And it starts to get your critical thinking back online really slowly. And Rick is like, he didn't pee, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, he did nothing except talk at me for 8 hours straight every day. I don't know how he did it. I've peed twice during the course of this conversation. Obviously got up and went, I've been wetting myself. But yeah, so it was just like this intense information download. And it was all stuff that, again, got you to recognize the dynamics, but without addressing the group itself. And I remember at the end of the first day was when I started to break. Like I was engaging all the thought stopping techniques. I knew how I was chanting in my mind. I was trying to focus on a single point on the table so I didn't absorb anything that he said to me. Like I was doing everything I could to protect my mind from the information that he was giving me. But towards the end of the first day, which is quite fast, I started to, be like, hang on a minute. And I remember that first night being like, I thought I was in hell. I was so scared. And you get the fear, right? I know you understand what it's like. And I was also so confused and I was so unwell. And I remember like driving to the mall and just walking around in a daze that evening, just being like, I don't know what the hell is going on. And then going to the car park, like opposite my house. It was like an oval next to my house, and just screaming, crying, like at the top of my lungs. I was so like, it felt like the inside of me was tearing apart. And I just was an absolute mess. And I was angry at mum. I would not talk to her. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to see anybody. I just sat in my room, and I remember texting the group and being like, I'm terrified. Mum's brought someone over. And they were calling me and saying, we'll book you a plane. You need to fly to Melbourne right now. And they kept contacting me. And at that point, I was like, I'm scared of them now. I don't know whether I can trust them. Sure. And I don't know who I can trust. I'm alone. I don't know what's going on. Like, just so confused, right? That they were continually like bombarding me with calls and being like, come to Melbourne, get out of there. And I remember being like, I can't do that. Like, I'm too scared to leave. I'm too scared to stay. I'm too sick to really, to have the strength to take myself to Melbourne. I've just come out of hospital. And so I stayed. And the next day was when I really started to sort of acknowledge what this group was, what it was about, and be open to learning more. And And I remember the relief that you talked about too. Like, I remember going for a walk, in the weeks after that, being like, I can feel any emotions that I want to. I can think any thoughts I want to. Like, we weren't allowed to feel anything but happy and grateful when we were in the group. Now I can feel the full spectrum of emotions. I can feel happy. I can feel sad. I can feel angry. And it's me. I belong to myself again. And that was like, the shame, the guilt, all that stuff it was like taking off a really big, heavy coat. And I just remember almost feeling intoxicated with the freedom that I had inside my mind.
Right.
But, at the same time, as you would know very well, it's an incredibly painful and hard process to go through too.
Yeah. I think it's terrifying that it took you to be on death's door to be able to be willing to question this religion. And I just think about all the women out there who aren't at that point and aren't able to see it clearly. And I just have to validate your situation. And I can say I 100% know what that feels like to have that loss of identity and for it to happen so quickly, because I'm sure once you allowed yourself to take in the information, everything was so clear and you were just like, holy shit, absolutely. What just happened to me? And how did I believe that? And all of your critical thinking comes online almost in an instant and you start to connect the dots. And that's why that happened. And that's why they told me this and were grooming me for that. And I just can't even imagine in some ways the relief that you felt that you were never left alone with that man, that the only interaction you had with him was in prison.
Absolutely. I was so lucky. And I agree. Like, it's so sad that I was lucky, and not everyone is as lucky as I was. Thousands and thousands of women have been raped and molested. And also thousands and thousands of women and men have had years of their life stolen from them. Yeah. In which they were only allowed to pursue the priorities and the goals of the group and completely deny themselves and any sense of ownership they have over their lives. And, I still know of women who were that I was in with at the time and men, and it's so sad. Like, it's so tragic. But once you're out, you know, like once you've started questioning, there's no way you go back, like especially a group like this, as you know too much. And that is exactly why they were like, do not Google anything about us. Make sure you don't listen to anyone talking about us except for us, because they needed ownership of that narrative.
Yeah, it's crucial to keep them in that information bubble. And the same thing with Mormonism. They recently said that being called Mormon is a victory for Satan. No, it's because you don't want people Googling Mormon and figuring out all the information that's out there. So it's like...
The stories they spin are incredible, aren't they?
Yeah, and that was supposed to be a revelation from God, Liz.
Oh my God.
God told him that recently, like a few years ago.
What?
Anyway.
Oh, recently. Okay.
Recently.
Oh, gosh.
So,
and when it's from God, right? Like, who are you to question that? Like, that's God.
Exactly. God cares about marketing. So I love the consciousness part of your story. And so this is where the conversation can get a little bit lighter and we can talk about how you're doing now and how you're thriving. And I just absolutely love that you're going into psychology and have an interest in becoming a deprogrammer yourself. It's just so amazing. Tell everyone what that's about.
So thank you for asking. Look, it's been a long road, right? Because I, again, was raised in religion. I was Pentecostal Christian for years. When I came out, I remember having a moment where I was like, what if none of this is real? Like, what if God's not, what if the whole thing, you know, is a hoax? And and I remember distinctly being like, I cannot go that far. I can't question everything. Like, I've already lost so much. I need to plug back into my church and to God. And so I spent 2 years at Bible college trying to figure it out. I don't recommend it to anyone. But what it did was got me to recognize that the dynamics of coercion, manipulation, you know, all of those sorts of toxic control techniques were being utilized by the church that I then went to after that, and all the church and religious contexts that I went to after that. And that's not to say that I disagree with religion entirely or faith entirely, but what my own personal experience was, going to Bible college felt like I was undergoing coercive techniques and predatory dynamics all over again. Yeah. And so that eventually was what I think catalyzed my exit from faith in general. And I don't know what I believe, and I'm happy to say that I'm content to sit in the gray areas of life now, which is not something, you know, you get used to growing up. It's black and white. But being able to admit that there's something you don't know and may never know is pretty empowering. You know, if you've been told you have to know, and this has to be true and this has to be not true. And I remember hearing, like, when I first started coming out, like, the mark of intelligence is, like, one of the main marks of intelligence is being able to hold two conflicting ideas or concepts in your mind at one time and not needing to get rid of one and allow the other be completely true. And so I do try and embrace that in my life now, but it's been a process, right? Like, as you would know, it takes a long time to start exploring outside of thinking in just binary terms. But yeah, I started, studying psychology. I have a career outside of all of this. It's completely removed from the cult world, but I have worked with Rick Allen Ross to deprogram other victims, and I'm affiliated with Cult Information Family Support, called KIFS, which is an organisation in Australia who does wonderful work helping people to escape and also counselling them after they've left.
Wow.
I remember saying to Rick, like, you know, what would I need to do to be a deprogrammer as well? And he said, you could do it, but you need to stop being so nice. And I was like, that's hard. But he's a tough nut. Like, you know, you need to be firm. You need to be, and that's something I'm working on. But also studying psychology was a big part of that. And I think what I wanted as well in studying psychology was to really understand from a psychological perspective the dynamics of coercion, coercive control, brainwashing, manipulation, and also the personality type of cult leaders. You know, they tend to be narcissistic psychopaths, and Rick called them cookie cutter cult leaders. And just to get my head around those dynamics and understand them from a scientific point of view, not just an emotional point of view. And you can certainly do that without studying, and many people have, but I just felt like that was important for me to have as a tool if I wanted to go into that world in the future. And It is dangerous though. Like Rick has told me that, he's been sued so many times.
Wow.
He's been stalked. He's been threatened like countless times, because cults are very litigious and aggressive. And he told me about one colleague that had had live snakes put in their letterbox by a cult. Like, so they it's not a safe career path.
Right.
And so, and I also noticed that when I came out, like there were no psychologists that really got what I'd gone through. And that's because it's so kind of unusual, and I don't blame them. They were great psychologists, but I never was able to find a psychologist who got the kind of trauma that I had experienced, which is quite a complex form of trauma.
Right.
And so to be able to be that for someone else in the future would be my absolute goal, whether it's deprogramming, whether it's counseling and counseling sessions, anything like that, where I can help provide people hope and, healing. That's what matters to me. So yeah.
Liz, you are an inspiration. I'm just floored.
You're an inspiration.
Oh, geez. Thank you.
Seriously, the work that you're doing, it's incredible.
Thank you.
And it's so fucking brave. Sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Of course. Do your thing.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that. I feel like,
seriously,
it is a form of psychology a little bit. These tend to be kind of therapeutic for people and for me too, just talking some things out and throwing my ideas against the wall. And so I'm happy that people are listening and enjoying it. But man, going to school for psychology and putting yourself in that line of work is just so amazing. And I'm just so happy that you're able to use that awful experience that you went through to help other people. And I always say this, it's not to be grateful for the experience that you had, but to use what you had to really make a difference and change your situation. So I'm just so proud of you. And I love that so much. And before we go, I need your Linda Listen moment, sassy statement as the toddler goes, or inspiration. Up to you. Okay.
So Linda Listen, knowledge is power. Critical thought is power. And if you're in a religion or ideology or faith group that demonizes doubt or asking questions, then maybe those questions are worth looking at, because if it's something that's absolute truth, then it should hold up to any and all forms of questioning and still remain evidently true.
Amen. Amen, Liz. I will join your cult. So good. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been incredible.
Thank you so much. It was so wonderful to speak to you.
Yeah, you are just so brave for coming on and telling your story. And guys, if you're listening, drop some comments of support for Liz here and thank her for coming on, because it's not easy. And before we go, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say, like, what you're doing and giving me a platform as one of the victims speaking out is so important. And, not just myself, but many other ex-members are so grateful that you have provided this, because, getting the word out is really important at this point in time. So just sincerely thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that we may have one other person coming on the show, which is pending, and the door is open for that. Yes. And I'm happy to speak to more people who have left this particular cult as well. So you know how to contact me. And for everyone else watching, thank you so much for taking the time. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can join on Patreon, patreon.com/cults to consciousness. Thank you so much to my newest patrons, Lindy, Rachel, and Renee. I really appreciate your support. It means a lot. And for everyone else, just liking and sharing and commenting really helps me, helps the podcast as well. So thank you for that. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious and be well.